Promised $2 a day, given chains instead, the true story of Missouri's forgotten prisoners, 1851. The Stranger's Offer. The advertisement appeared in the Philadelphia Gazette on March 12, 1851. Simple words. Promising words. Free men wanted, lumber work in Missouri Territory. $2 daily wage. Housing provided. Honest labor for honest pay. Contact Mr. Silas Drummond, Front Street Tavern. Samuel Briggs read those words 5 times before his hands stopped shaking. He was 28 years old, born free in Pennsylvania, and had spent every day of his adult life proving he deserved that freedom. He worked the docks, hauling cargo that white men wouldn't touch. He saved every spare coin. He dreamed of land, his own land, where no one could question his right to exist. $2 a day was more money than Samuel had ever imagined earning. In 6 months, he could save enough to buy property. Real property. A future. "You're not seriously considering this," his sister Martha said when he told her. She was 10 years older, wiser, more cautious. Missouri? "Samuel, you know what happens to our people out there." "It's legitimate work," Samuel insisted. "The advertisement says free men." "It's in the newspaper." "Newspapers lie," Martha shot back. "Especially about Missouri. That territory's barely holding together. Half slave, half free, and nobody agrees on which half you're standing in." But Samuel had already made up his mind. Welcome to the Dusty Chronicle. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold historical stories. The Journey West. 3 other men answered Drummond's advertisement. Isaiah Carter, 42, a carpenter from New York who'd lost his wife to cholera and saw nothing left for him in the city. Thomas Webb, 19, barely more than a boy, whose mother had scraped together money for his journey, believing her son deserved better than factory work. And Jacob Morrison, 35, a mason who'd been free his entire life but had never stopped looking over his shoulder, never stopped feeling the weight of chains that had never touched him. They met at the tavern on March 20. Silas Drummond was exactly what Samuel expected, a thick-built white man with a tobacco-stained beard and eyes that assessed everything like merchandise. But his handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Gentlemen," Drummond said, spreading a map across the scarred wooden table. "You're looking at opportunity. My lumber operations near Jefferson City. Good timber country. Hard work, but fair wages. You'll bunk together, eat together, work together. I treat my men right, regardless of color." "Regardless of color," Isaiah repeated slowly. "You mean you hire colored workers?" "I hire workers who work," Drummond replied. "Your papers show you're free men. That's all that matters to me." They signed contracts that night. Simple documents promising 6 months of labor, $2 daily, room and board provided. Samuel's hand trembled as he wrote his name, the signature of a free man making a free choice. The journey took 11 days by steamboat and wagon. They traveled through country that grew wilder with each mile, leaving behind cities and farms for dense forests and isolated settlements. The other workers on Drummond's wagon, all white men, kept their distance, speaking in low voices that stopped whenever Samuel or the others came near. "Don't like the feel of this," Jacob muttered on the 8th night. "Something's wrong." "You're just nervous," Thomas said. The boy still had optimism. Still believed the world worked the way his mother had promised. "No," Jacob insisted. "Look around. We haven't seen another colored person since we left St. Louis. Not one. This territory's supposed to be half free. Where are they?" Samuel had noticed the same thing. But he'd signed a contract. He'd committed. Turning back now meant admitting Martha was right, admitting he'd been a fool. Arrival at Drummond's camp. The lumber camp appeared on the 12th day, nestled in a valley where the forest grew thick and the nearest settlement was 30 miles away. 60 men worked there, all white except for a handful of Indians who moved like ghosts through the trees, speaking to no one. Drummond's main building was a rough timber structure that served as office, supply house, and living quarters. Behind it stood workers' cabins, small, cramped, but weather-tight. And beyond those, separated by 100 yards of cleared ground, stood a different kind of structure. A barracks. Long, low, built of rough-cut logs with a single door and windows so small they barely let in light. A heavy chain wrapped around the door handles, secured with a padlock the size of a man's fist. "That's where you'll bunk," Drummond said casually, gesturing toward the barracks. "Separate quarters. Easier that way." "Easier for who?" Isaiah asked. Drummond's smile didn't reach his eyes. "For everyone. My white workers aren't accustomed to sharing space with coloreds. This way, no trouble. You boys get privacy, they get peace of mind." Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "The chain." "Security," Drummond interrupted. "We've had problems with theft. Indians, mostly. They'll steal anything not locked down. This way, your belongings stay safe while you work. You lock us in." Jacob's voice had gone flat, dangerous. "At night, for your own protection." Drummond's hand moved to rest on the pistol at his belt, a casual gesture that carried unmistakable threat. "Wolves, bears, all kinds of dangers out here. This keeps you safe. Keeps everyone safe." The four men exchanged glances. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to do anything except enter that barracks. But Drummond wasn't alone anymore. 6 other men had materialized from the workers' cabins, all armed, all watching with the patient stillness of hunters who'd cornered prey. "Now, gentlemen," Drummond said, his voice hardening. "You signed contracts. Legal, binding contracts. You owe me 6 months of labor, and I intend to collect. You can walk into that barracks peaceful-like, or my boys can help you. Your choice." Thomas moved first, young and terrified, stumbling toward the barracks because he couldn't think of any other option. Isaiah followed, shoulders slumped in resignation. Jacob hesitated, his hands clenching into fists, but Samuel grabbed his arm. "Not yet," Samuel whispered. "Too many of them. We need to think." They entered the barracks. The door slammed behind them. The chain rattled. The padlock clicked shut. And Samuel Briggs understood, too late, always too late, that Martha had been right. The first night. The barracks was worse inside than out. 20 bunks lined the walls, rough wooden frames with straw mattresses that smelled of mildew and old sweat. 15 of those bunks were occupied. 15 other black men, all freeborn or freed, all lured by the same advertisement or similar lies. Some had been here for weeks. Others for months. One man, his hair gone white despite looking barely 40, claimed he'd been locked in this barracks for 3 years. 3 years? Thomas's voice cracked. But the contract. "The contract's a lie," the white-haired man said. His name was Elijah, and his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd stopped hoping. "Drummond adds charges. Says you damaged equipment, wasted supplies, failed to meet quotas. Every week, he adds more debt. Says you can't leave until it's paid. But the debt only grows." "That's illegal," Isaiah protested. "We're free men. He can't." "Who's going to stop him?" Elijah interrupted. "The sheriff. Drummond pays him. The territorial judge. Drummond's cousin. This whole county's owned by 3 families, and Drummond's one of them. You think anyone cares what happens to colored men who were stupid enough to sign contracts they couldn't read properly?" Samuel moved to the window. Through the narrow gap, he could see the main camp. Drummond stood talking with his foreman, both men laughing at some shared joke. Beyond them, the forest stretched for miles, dense, unfamiliar, and filled with dangers Samuel couldn't even imagine. "There has to be a way out," Jacob said. "We fight. We escape. Something. Men have tried," another voice spoke from the shadows. A young man, maybe 25, with scars crisscrossing his back visible through his torn shirt. "Drummond catches them. Makes examples. 3 months ago, a man named Robert tried to run. Drummond's dogs found him in 6 hours. They brought him back, and Drummond." The young man's voice failed. "What did he do?" Samuel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Buried him to his neck in the clearing. Left him there for 2 days in the sun. No water, no shade. When they finally dug him out, Robert couldn't walk, couldn't speak right. His mind was broken. He died a week later. Drummond reported it as heat stroke. Accidental death. Nobody investigated." The barracks fell silent except for the sound of men breathing, each one processing their new reality. They were prisoners. Not slaves, the law said they couldn't be slaves. But imprisoned nonetheless, held by contracts and isolation and violence that the law would never acknowledge. The plan forms. Samuel didn't sleep that first night. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, and thought about Martha. About how she'd begged him not to go. About how she'd known, had somehow known, that promises made to black men in newspapers were just another kind of chain. But he wasn't dead yet. And he wasn't broken. "We have numbers," he whispered to Jacob in the darkness. 19 of us. Maybe 8 or 10 guards. If we move together. "They have guns," Jacob whispered back. "And they know this country. We run, they hunt us down like Robert. So we don't run. We fight. And die. You saw those men, Samuel. They're waiting for us to try something. Probably betting on which one of us breaks first." Samuel rolled onto his side, studying the other men in the barracks. Most were already asleep, exhausted from 12-hour work days. Elijah sat awake, staring at nothing. The young man with the scars was crying silently into his pillow. These were broken men. Defeated men. Men who'd already tried fighting and had learned that fighting only brought more suffering. But Thomas was different. The boy was terrified, yes, but his eyes still held fire. And Isaiah, the carpenter, had stopped talking, but Samuel could see him examining the barracks walls, the door, the windows. Calculating. Planning. "We give it 3 days, Samuel decided. We work, we watch, we learn their patterns. Then we find a weakness. Every prison has one." "This isn't a prison," Jacob said bitterly. "Prisons have laws. This is something worse." Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. The sound carried through the thin walls, and Samuel wondered if it was actually a wolf, or if it was one of Drummond's men, signaling to the others. Reminding the men in the barracks that they were surrounded, watched, and utterly alone. Dawn of the first day. The chain rattled at dawn. The door swung open. Drummond's foreman, a scarred man named Pike, stood in the entrance with a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Work time," Pike announced. "You've got 60 seconds to be outside and lined up. Anyone who's late loses breakfast and gains extra hours." 19 men stumbled out into the gray morning light. The air was cold, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something chemical and wrong that Samuel couldn't identify. Drummond emerged from his office, coffee cup in hand, surveying his workforce like a general inspecting troops. "Welcome to your first day, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying false cheerfulness. "You'll be assigned to clearing teams. Trees don't cut themselves. You'll work from dawn until I say you're done. You'll meet quotas, or you'll work longer. Questions?" Thomas raised his hand. The boy couldn't help himself, he'd been raised to believe that honest questions deserved honest answers. Sir, the contract said room and board. When do we eat? Drummond's smile widened. After you earn it. First day's a test. You prove you can work, you eat. You prove you're lazy, you go hungry. Fair's fair. It wasn't fair. Nothing about this was fair. But Samuel bit his tongue and fell into line as Pike distributed tools, axes, saws, equipment that felt deliberately awkward and heavy. They marched into the forest. And Samuel Briggs understood that he'd walked into a trap far more sophisticated than simple slavery. He'd walked into a nightmare that pretended to be legal. Cliffhanger, Samuel and the others begin their first day of labor, realizing they're trapped in a system designed to break them. Will they survive long enough to find a way out? Or will they become like the broken men who've already given up hope? The first crack in the walls. The killing work. The trees in Drummond's territory were old-growth timber, oak and pine that had stood for hundreds of years before white men came looking for profit. Each tree was worth a fortune to the right buyer. But cutting them down was work designed to destroy men's bodies and spirits. Samuel's team consisted of himself, Jacob, Isaiah, Thomas, and 3 other men from the barracks, men who'd already been broken by months of labor and had stopped speaking except when necessary. Their supervisor was a man named Garrett, who chewed tobacco and spoke in grunts and carried a whip coiled at his belt like a sleeping snake. You see that oak? Garrett pointed to a tree that must have been 8 feet in diameter. That's your quota for today. Felled, limbed, and sectioned by sunset. You finish early, you eat extra. You finish late, you don't eat at all. You understand? That's impossible, Isaiah said. He'd worked lumber before. He knew what he was talking about. That tree needs at least 2 days with proper equipment and... The whip cracked. Not hitting Isaiah, but close enough that the carpenter flinched. Did I ask for your opinion? Garrett spit tobacco juice. I gave you a quota. You meet it, or you suffer the consequences. They worked. God and every saint that ever lived knew they worked. The axes were dull, the saws poorly maintained. Every swing sent shocks through Samuel's arms. Every pull of the saw felt like it was tearing muscle from bone. By noon, they'd barely made a dent in the massive oak. Thomas's hands were bleeding. Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps. Even Isaiah, who'd done this kind of work before, looked ready to collapse. Garrett watched from the shade, drinking water from a canteen he didn't offer to share. You're behind quota, he announced at midday. Way behind. At this rate, none of you eat tonight. We need water, Samuel managed to say between gasps. We'll work faster if... You'll work faster if you're motivated, Garrett interrupted. And hunger's damn good motivation. The breaking point. By late afternoon, young Thomas collapsed. One moment he was pulling on the saw, the next he was on the ground, unconscious, his body simply giving up. Samuel dropped his axe and rushed to the boy's side. He needs water. Medicine. He's burning up. Garrett strolled over, looked down at Thomas with the interest someone might show a broken tool. Lazy, Garrett pronounced. Playing sick to get out of work. He's dying. Jacob shouted. Then he should have worked harder. Drag him to the side. The rest of you keep working. Quota doesn't change just because one man decides to quit. Something snapped in Jacob. Samuel saw it happen, saw the moment when fear transformed into rage, when survival instinct gave way to the need to fight back even if fighting meant death. Jacob grabbed his axe and turned toward Garrett. Jacob, no. Samuel lunged, catching his friend's arm before the axe could swing. For 3 heartbeats, everything hung in balance. Jacob's muscles trembled with the desire to split Garrett's skull. Garrett's hand moved to his pistol. The other workers froze, waiting to see if they were about to witness murder or if the moment would pass. Samuel held Jacob's eyes. Not like this. Not yet. Slowly, Jacob lowered the axe. The moment passed. Garrett laughed, a sound without humor, and made a note in the small book he carried. That's insubordination, Garrett said. Threatening a supervisor. That's 2 weeks added to your contract, Morrison. Plus fines for lost work time. Congratulations, you just extended your stay. The secret. That night, locked back in the barracks, they tended to Thomas as best they could. The boy had a fever, his skin hot and dry. Elijah brought rags soaked in the small water bucket they were allowed, pressed them to Thomas's forehead. He won't last a week at this pace, Elijah said quietly. None of you will. You're strong now, but this work breaks everyone eventually. Samuel sat with his head in his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down. He'd convinced himself this would work. He'd led these men here. Thomas's mother had trusted her son to this opportunity that Samuel had believed was real. There has to be something, Samuel said. Some way to fight back, to get word out, to. There is, a voice said from the corner. Everyone turned. The speaker was one of the men who'd barely spoken since Samuel arrived, a thin man named Daniel who had the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much. What? Jacob asked. Daniel glanced at the door, listening for guards. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Not everyone in this county supports what Drummond does. There's a settlement 15 miles north. Quakers. Abolitionists. They help people escape. Runaway slaves, mostly, but they'd help us too if they knew what was happening here. 15 miles through forest we don't know, Isaiah said. With Drummond's men hunting us. With dogs. Not us, Daniel corrected. One man. One fast runner who knows how to hide. Gets to the Quakers, tells them what's happening, brings back help. The law, maybe. Or just witnesses. Drummond's operation only works because it's secret. Expose it, and even his cousin the judge would have to act. The idea hung in the air like smoke. Dangerous. Nearly impossible. But possible. Who? Jacob asked. Who could make that run? All eyes turned to Samuel. He was the youngest of the original 4, the strongest, the one who'd done the least time under Drummond's brutality. Me, Samuel said, though fear made his mouth dry. I'll go. The plan. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Daniel drew a map in the dirt, showing the route north, follow the creek for 3 miles, then head toward the break in the ridge where 2 rock formations stood like sentinels. Beyond that, watch for a lightning-struck oak, then follow the old game trail north until finding a stream that ran clear instead of the muddy brown of the main creek. The Quaker settlement was just beyond. Drummond's patrols sweep the south and west, Daniel explained. He's worried about people running toward Jefferson City. North is risky, steeper terrain, harder going. But that means fewer guards. What about the dogs? Samuel asked. Elijah provided the answer. Creek running. Stay in the water as long as you can. Masks your scent. When you leave the water, find pine sap, smear it on your feet and legs. Dogs hate the smell, confuses them. When? Isaiah asked. Sunday, Daniel said. Drummond goes to town on Sundays. Takes most of his guards with him. Likes to drink and gamble and pretend he's a respectable businessman. Left guards are minimal, and they're usually drunk by afternoon. Sunday was 4 days away. For more days of killing work, of watching Thomas grow weaker, of feeling his own strength drain away. But 4 days also gave them time to gather what Samuel would need. A canteen, stolen from the work site. Dried meat, smuggled from meals and hidden in bunks. A knife, just a small one, taken from the lumber tools and carefully concealed. Not much. But it would have to be enough. Sunday morning. The day arrived cold and gray, with clouds promising rain. Samuel worked through the morning with his muscles screaming, his mind focused on the coming attempt. At noon, Drummond's wagon rolled out, loaded with the boss and 8 of his men. That left 4 guards on the camp, Pike and 3 others whose names Samuel didn't know. By 2 in the afternoon, as Daniel had predicted, the remaining guards had broken into Drummond's whiskey supply. Samuel could hear them laughing, shouting, growing louder and sloppier as the hours passed. At 4 o'clock, Elijah created the distraction. The old man walked to the barracks door and began screaming, a wordless, desperate sound that brought guards running. He'd bitten his own tongue, filled his mouth with blood, and was convulsing on the floor like a man in a seizure. "Get the doc!" Pike shouted, though there was no doctor for miles. "Somebody get water!" In the chaos, with all eyes on Elijah's performance, Samuel slipped out the back window. It was barely large enough for a man his size, and he tore his shirt squeezing through, but he made it. Then he ran. The chase. The first mile was easy. Samuel ran through forest he'd worked in, territory he'd memorized during the past week. His lungs burned, his legs already tired from the day's labor, but fear and adrenaline drove him forward. He found the creek exactly where Daniel said it would be. Stepped into the icy water and began running upstream, his feet slipping on moss-covered rocks, the current fighting his every step. Behind him, faint but growing louder, he heard shouting. Then, worse, the baying of hounds. They'd discovered his escape faster than expected. Maybe Elijah's distraction hadn't lasted long enough. Maybe Pike was more observant than they'd thought. It didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of dogs getting closer, their howls carrying through the forest like death itself had a voice. Samuel ran harder. Water splashed around him. His boots filled, weighing him down, but he didn't dare stop to empty them. Every second counted. The rock formations appeared ahead, the sentinels Daniel had described. Samuel scrambled up the bank, found the pine trees, broke off low-hanging branches, and rubbed the sticky sap across his legs and feet. The smell was overwhelming, sharp and chemical, making his eyes water. Behind him, the dogs baying changed pitch. Confusion. The sap was working. But the dogs weren't his only problem. Through the trees, he could see torches. Men on horseback, spreading out, cutting off escape routes. They'd brought a hunting party. This wasn't just about catching one escaped worker. This was about making an example. Samuel ran north, abandoning the trail, crashing through underbrush that tore at his skin. Branches whipped his face. His lungs felt like they were filling with fire. But he kept moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant Robert's fate, buried alive, left to die slowly while Drummond watched. The lightning struck oak. He found it near sunset, a massive oak split down the middle by some ancient lightning strike, its dead branches reaching toward the darkening sky like skeletal fingers. Samuel collapsed against it, gasping, his body screaming for rest. But the torches were getting closer. He could hear voices now, men calling to each other, coordinating the search. He came this way. Dogs lost the scent, but he can't be far. Spread out. Check every hollow. Samuel forced himself to move. Beyond the oak, the ground dropped away into a ravine. He could see water at the bottom, the clear stream Daniel had mentioned. The Quaker settlement was close. So close. But between him and safety were Drummond's men, forming a net that was closing with every passing minute. He had 2 choices, hide and hope they passed him by, or make one final desperate run for the stream. Samuel chose to run. He burst from cover, sliding down the ravine slope, rocks tearing at his hands as he tried to control his descent. Behind him, men shouted. A gunshot cracked, the bullet whining off a stone inches from his head. He hit the stream at full speed, the icy water stealing his breath. But he forced himself to keep moving, to keep running downstream toward where Daniel had promised salvation waited. The current was stronger here, trying to pull him off his feet. His vision blurred. His strength was failing. But ahead, through the darkness, he saw lights. Buildings. A settlement. Safety. Or so he prayed. The Quaker door. Samuel crashed through the underbrush and into a clearing. 3 buildings stood in the darkness, a house, a barn, and what looked like a meeting hall. Lamplight glowed in the house windows. He staggered to the door and pounded on it with the last of his strength. Please. Please, I need help. Behind him, torches appeared at the edge of the clearing. Drummond's men, closing in. The door opened. A woman stood there, middle-aged, wearing the plain dress of the Quakers. Her eyes widened at the sight of Samuel, bleeding, soaked, desperate. Please, Samuel gasped. They're hunting me. I'm not a slave, I'm free, but they trapped me, and I. Come inside, the woman said calmly. Then, louder, to someone behind her, Nathaniel, fetch the others. We have a guest. Samuel stumbled inside. The warmth of the house hit him like a physical force. The woman closed the door just as the first of Drummond's men reached the clearing. Pounding on the door. Open up. We're pursuing an escaped criminal. The woman, her name was Margaret, Samuel would learn later, opened the door again, placing herself between Samuel and the armed men outside. This is Quaker property, Margaret said, her voice steel-wrapped in calm. And this man has claimed sanctuary. You will not enter. Pike pushed forward, his face red with anger and exertion. That man's a fugitive. He belongs to Mr. Drummond. He belongs to God, Margaret replied. As do we all. And I'll not see harm come to any of God's children under this roof. We have the law on our side. Then fetch the law. Bring your sheriff, your judge, your papers. Until then, this man stays under our protection. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, Pike spat in the dirt and backed away. Drummond will hear about this, he threatened. You're making powerful enemies, woman. I've made peace with far more powerful forces than Silas Drummond, Margaret said. Now leave. You're trespassing. The men withdrew, but Samuel knew they wouldn't go far. They'd watch. They'd wait. And when they returned, they'd bring reinforcements. But for now, for this moment, he was safe. And he could finally tell someone the truth about what was happening in Drummond's camp. Cliffhanger, Samuel has escaped to the Quakers, but Drummond's men surround the settlement. Meanwhile, back at the camp, 18 men remain trapped, including dying Thomas. Will the Quakers be able to expose Drummond's operation before he retaliates? And what will Drummond do to the men left behind when he discovers someone has escaped? The reckoning. The council. By midnight, the Quaker meeting hall was filled with 30 people, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, all members of the settlement who'd been roused from their beds to hear Samuel's testimony. He told them everything. The advertisement, the false contracts, the barracks, the impossible quotas, the men buried alive or worked to death. His voice broke when he described Thomas, barely 19, dying of fever while Drummond's men called him lazy. Margaret's husband, Nathaniel, was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that held both compassion and fury. He listened to every word, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. This is slavery in all but name, Nathaniel said when Samuel finished. Contract bondage taken to evil extremes. We must act. How? Asked another Quaker, a young man named Joseph. Drummond has the local sheriff in his pocket. His cousin is the territorial judge. Who do we appeal to? Federal authorities, Nathaniel replied. This territory's status is contested. Half free, half slave. The federal government has oversight. If we can document what's happening, get sworn testimony from Samuel and others, we can force an investigation. That takes time, Margaret objected. Time those men in Drummond's camp don't have. Then we move on two fronts, Nathaniel decided. Joseph, you and Samuel ride for Jefferson City at first light. Find the federal marshal, show him the evidence. The rest of us, he looked around the room at his fellow Quakers, we go to Drummond's camp. We bear witness. We make his operation visible. He can't harm those men if witnesses are watching. He has guns, someone pointed out. He's not going to let us just walk in. No, Nathaniel agreed. But we are citizens. We have rights. And we're not asking permission. We're demanding access to men who signed contracts under false pretenses. If Drummond refuses, that itself is evidence of wrongdoing. It was a bold plan. A dangerous plan. But it was something. Samuel felt hope kindle in his chest for the first time in weeks. Drummond's rage. Back at the lumber camp, dawn brought a reckoning of a different kind. Silas Drummond had returned from town in the middle of the night, roused by a messenger who'd ridden hard to tell him about the escape. He'd arrived drunk and furious, a combination that made him more dangerous than usual. The men in the barracks heard him coming, his voice carrying across the clearing as he screamed at Pike, blaming him for the escape, threatening to dock his pay, to have him beaten, to make him share in whatever punishment the remaining prisoners received. Then Drummond's boots stomped toward the barracks. The door crashed open. Lamplight spilled inside, silhouetting Drummond's bulk. Which one of you helped him? Drummond roared. Which one of you helped that runaway bastard escape? Silence. 19 men, exhausted and terrified, stared at the floor. Nobody wants to talk. Drummond's voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting, a cold, controlled fury. Fine. Then you all share the punishment. No food for 3 days. Work quotas doubled. And if I find out any of you knew about this escape plan. He let the threat hang. Elijah, still recovering from his performance, raised his head. You can't do this. We have contracts. Legal protections. Drummond crossed the room in 3 strides and backhanded Elijah across the face. The old man fell, blood streaming from his split lip. Your contracts say you obey my rules. And my rules say traitors get punished. All of you. Starting now. The Quaker arrival. 23 Quakers arrived at Drummond's camp at noon the next day. They came on foot and horseback, carrying no weapons but bringing something more powerful, absolute moral certainty and the determination of people who'd faced down worse threats than one corrupt businessman. Nathaniel led them, Margaret at his side. They stopped at the camp's entrance, where Pike and 6 armed guards blocked their way. This is private property, Pike announced. You're trespassing. We're citizens concerned about the welfare of workers held under questionable contracts, Nathaniel replied calmly. We demand to see the men housed in that barracks and verify they're being treated according to law. You demand? Pike laughed. You don't demand nothing, Quaker. Get off this property before. Before what? Margaret interrupted. Before you shoot us. In front of 24 witnesses. Please do. I'm certain the territorial authorities would be very interested in why you felt the need to murder unarmed civilians for asking questions. Drummond emerged from his office, his face purple with rage barely contained. He'd sobered up since the previous night, which made him more calculated but no less dangerous. Well, Drummond said, forcing a smile. To what do I owe this invasion? We've received reports of labor abuses, Nathaniel said. Men held against their will. Contracts extended through fabricated charges. We're here to investigate. Based on what? The word of a runaway criminal. Drummond's smile widened. Samuel Briggs violated his contract. Destroyed my property trying to escape. By law, I could have him hunted down and brought back in chains. Then bring your law, Nathaniel challenged. Show us these contracts. Show us your account books. Demonstrate that everything you're doing is legal and above board. The two men stared at each other. Around them, Drummond's workers had stopped pretending to work, watching the confrontation with barely concealed interest. I don't have to show you a damn thing, Drummond said finally. This is my property. These are my workers. And you are trespassing. Pike, if these people aren't gone in 60 seconds, you have my permission to remove them by force. The guards raised their weapons. The Quakers didn't move. We will stand here, Nathaniel said quietly, and bear witness to whatever you do next. Your choice, Mr. Drummond. Let us see that the men in that barracks are well and whole, or make us martyrs. Either way, the truth about this place will become known. The breaking point. The standoff held for 5 heartbeat continued 10:15 seconds. Then a voice called from inside the barracks. Help us. Please, God, help us. It was Jacob. His voice cracked with desperation. He's dying. Thomas is dying and they won't help him. Margaret moved before anyone could stop her. She walked straight toward the barracks, ignoring the guns, ignoring Drummond's shouted orders to halt. Ma'am, stop. Pike raised his rifle. Shoot me then, Margaret said without breaking stride. Shoot a Quaker woman trying to help a dying boy. See how that plays in court. She reached the barracks door. The padlock hung open. Drummond's men had been so focused on the Quakers they'd forgotten to secure it after the morning shift. Margaret pulled the door open and stepped inside. What she saw made her gasp. 19 men, gaunt and hollow-eyed. Thomas lying on a bunk, his skin gray, his breathing shallow. Jacob and Isaiah kneeling beside him. Elijah's face swollen and bruised from Drummond's beating. Men who looked more like concentration camp prisoners than contract workers. Sweet Jesus, Margaret whispered. She turned back to the door, her voice carrying across the clearing. Nathaniel. These men need medical attention immediately. This one's dying. Drummond started toward her, his hand on his pistol, but Nathaniel and the other Quakers had already moved. They flooded into the barracks, their sheer numbers and moral authority overwhelming the guards' willingness to use violence. This is illegal. Drummond roared. You're trespassing. You're interfering with. With what? Nathaniel interrupted, emerging from the barracks with Thomas in his arms. The boy was barely conscious, his skin burning with fever. With your murder of this child? With your torture of free men? With your violation of every law of God and man? Drummond's face went through several colors. His hand tightened on his pistol. For a moment, Samuel, watching from the forest where he'd returned with the Quakers, thought Drummond might actually draw and shoot. But he didn't. Because at that moment, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the valley. The Marshal's arrival. U.S. Marshal William Henderson arrived with 6 deputies and a territorial judge who wasn't Drummond's cousin. Henderson was a lean man with gray mutton chops and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst to be shocked by anything. He dismounted, surveyed the scene, the armed guards, the Quakers, the men emerging from the barracks, and his jaw tightened. Silas Drummond. Henderson's voice carried authority that needed no volume to command attention. Marshal. Drummond straightened, trying to regain composure. Thank God you're here. These people have invaded my property, interfered with my business. I'm here because a sworn affidavit reached my desk yesterday, Henderson interrupted. Testimony from a Samuel Briggs alleging you're holding men in fraudulent contract bondage. I'm here to investigate. It's all legal, Drummond insisted. They signed contracts. They owe me labor. If they've failed to meet their obligations. Show me the contracts, Henderson said. Show me your account books. Show me evidence that these charges you've levied are legitimate. For the first time, Drummond hesitated. Henderson smiled, a cold, knowing expression. That's what I thought. Deputies, I want every man here interviewed. Separately. Document their testimony. And I want those account books seized as evidence. You can't, Drummond started. I can and I am, Henderson cut him off. Federal territory, federal crimes, federal jurisdiction. You're done, Drummond. The unraveling. The investigation took 3 days. In that time, every man in the barracks told his story. The pattern was identical: advertisements promising honest work, contracts that were deliberately vague, charges that accumulated faster than wages, violence threatened or delivered to anyone who objected. Drummond's account books told an even more damning story. He'd been running this scheme for 5 years, cycling through hundreds of men. Most were black, but some were Irish immigrants, Chinese laborers, Native Americans, anyone marginalized enough that their word wouldn't be believed against a white businessman. The accumulated charges were fictional. Damaged tools that had never been damaged. Wasted supplies that had never existed. Medical care that was never provided. Drummond had been making money twice, once from the lumber the men cut, again from the fabricated debts that kept them trapped. It was brilliant in its evil. And completely illegal. Marshal Henderson arrested Drummond and 6 of his supervisors on charges of fraud, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and, when Thomas died on the second day despite the Quakers' best medical care, manslaughter. The contracts were voided. The men were freed. Samuel stood in the clearing where he'd first been imprisoned, watching Drummond being loaded into a wagon in chains. Their eyes met. Drummond's face held pure hatred. You'll regret this, Drummond hissed. I have friends. Connections. I'll be out in a year, and when I am. You'll be a marked man, Henderson interrupted, closing the wagon door. Everyone knows what you did now. You'll have no friends. No connections. Just a reputation as the man who enslaved free men and got caught. The wagon rolled away. Samuel felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just exhaustion and the grief of Thomas's death. Margaret approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You saved them, she said. 18 men are free because of you. 19 men came here, Samuel replied. One's dead. That's not victory. No, Margaret agreed. But it's justice. And sometimes, that's all we can hope for. The aftermath. The trial took 6 months. Drummond was convicted on 14 counts and sentenced to 20 years hard labor, ironic justice that wasn't lost on anyone. The men from the barracks scattered. Some returned east. Others pushed west, looking for the fresh starts they'd originally sought. Elijah settled with the Quakers, too old and broken to travel further. Jacob and Isaiah started a carpentry business in Jefferson City, working together, watching each other's backs. Samuel returned to Philadelphia. Martha met him at the door of their family home. She didn't say, I told you so. She just held him while he cried for the first time since Thomas died. He never answered another advertisement. Never again trusted promises written in newspapers. But he also never stopped fighting. He testified before territorial committees about labor abuses. He wrote letters to abolition newspapers. He told Thomas's story to anyone who would listen, making sure the boy's death meant something. And on quiet nights, when the memories got too loud, Samuel would sit on his porch and look west, toward the territories where he'd learned that freedom was more fragile than he'd imagined. But also that it was worth fighting for. Always worth fighting for. Even when the fight cost everything.